So while we're seeing these problems occurring in the Middle East with inflation through the roof, there's people, seeing 20% inflation, 40% unemployment. In Egypt, I heard it was 80% of their earnings was going towards food. I mean, huge problems, and these are going to have effects around the world, and people usually jump into the US dollar. Well, they're doing the exact opposite. They're fleeing the US dollar the past few weeks. Since January 24th, I'll read from some notes here. The day before protests began in Egypt that would ultimately topple their government, the dollar has lost ground against the currencies of every one of so-called G10 industrialized nations except New Zealand. And that's because the huge earthquake that they had in New Zealand. But since January 24th, the dollar's fallen against 9 of the 10 currencies. Now, the dollar is definitely not where you want to be. I can't help myself but think as I'm buying things, buying lunch, going into places, as more and more I study this, I think, okay, here, I give you my paper, you give me some paper back. It's such a joke that, I'm giving you paper so you can give me that food, or I'm giving you paper to buy this radio or something. You're giving me a radio which has value, and I'm giving you paper which is worthless. How much longer are people going to accept this paper money that we use? Total scam. I mean, this leads me into silver. Right now, this silver quarter is $6.27. This quarter here from 1995 is 25 cents. The metal here is maybe, I don't know, 5-7 cents, something. But if we look at real money as opposed to paper, 2 of these silver dollars right here would definitely fill your gas tank back in the 50s. Early 60s. This silver quarter would buy you a gallon of gas. Silver quarter gets you a gallon and a half worth of gas now. This silver dollar here is $27. So 2 of these still fill your tank. Silver's been taken from us. Any currency of any value has been taken, stolen from us. People are starting to wake up to the fact that you need to have real money to preserve your wealth. You can't preserve it in paper money that's being inflated. The government is inflating the currency like never before. And there's people talking about a bubble in the silver market. There's nowhere near a bubble in the silver market. At best, what do we have? Maybe 1 to 3% of 1% of the United States population. Okay, say we're at 300 million. 1% would be 3 million people. 1 to 3% of that would be 30 to 90,000 people. I don't know. How many people in the U.S. are actually buying silver right now? 100,000 people? A couple hundred? I don't know. Maybe we'll say 5-6% of 1%. That's not a bubble. I mean, during the housing bubble, everybody and their grandma was buying investment houses and buying homes that they couldn't afford. It just totally ridiculous. So there's nowhere near a bubble in silver. That's one of the most ridiculous things that I've heard. So I wanted to also mention the fact that, talking about investing in silver, don't try and trade silver. I would highly recommend not trying to trade silver like I've tried to do in the stock market, in years past. There's no need to try and trade silver. You just buy a few ounces, buy a couple of these every week. Just average in. Just don't, because if you get in now, silver drops down to say 28 and you're in at 34, and you put a few grand in, you're several hundred out and you're like, man, I don't want to lose any more. And you pull it out and then it shoots right back up. You're like, oh man, what did I do? And you jump right back in again, and then it drops down. You get out. You fear and greed is totally going to play on your brain. You don't want to mess around with that. You don't want to mess around with jumping in and out of the silver market. Just accumulate silver. That's the best thing. I wanted today to talk a little about what the coming out of the Royal Canadian Mint. They're saying that they're having problems securing silver. So that's when you're hearing that, you're thinking about, well, there must be shortages. I mean, if they can't secure silver, and they're saying it's going to be harder to secure silver as the year goes on, that's, obvious right there. We're talking shortages this year. And 6.4 million ounces sold by the U.S. Mint, American Eagles in January. That's, look, if they just continue that every month, we're talking 70 million ounces are going to sell. Now, world production is at 720 million ounces. And demand's at 890. So that's 170 million ounces that we don't have from production. That's coming from melted down scrap. And that's been happening for 20 years. We've been outstripping silver for 20 years. And, it's just, there's so much in silver's favor. It's supply and demand is, it can get a little complex with the numbers and everything. But if you lay them out and look at them, China just totally flipped the ship here. The last 5 years, they were exporting 100 million ounces. And now they're importing 120 million ounces. So that's 220 million ounces taken out of that 700 that's being produced. Because they used to send out, they're the third largest silver producer behind Peru and Mexico. Well, they produce like 90 million ounces. So apparently they're keeping that and bringing in another 120. So they got, 210 to themselves out of that 720 world production. That leaves 500 for everybody else. And there's like 380 million used in industry. And with the amount of silver that's being jumped into because of all the inflation, all the paper inflating that's going on, I mean, it's just the silver just not exists. It's just not there. So the prices have to rise. The price is just going to keep rising. The silver's not there.